Welcome to Little Steps, Big Gains and episode 5 of our series on the evaluation of upper limb ataxia, standardized testing, and skill terminology. Throughout this series, we have learned about the role of the cerebellum, clinical characteristics, tremors, screening tools, and now we're going to pivot for our medical professionals on standardized testing and skilled terminology. So for medical professionals, now that we have looked at what clinical manifestations we see, why we see these clinical manifestations, we're going to tap into how do we describe these clinical manifestations. To do this, we're going to look at a skilled terminology inventory from the OT practice framework that you can find linked in the description below. First, calibrates, uses movement of appropriate force, speed, or extent while interacting with task objects. Examples include does not crush task objects, pushes a door with enough force to close it without a bang. Paces, maintains a consistent and effective rate or tempo of performance throughout the entire task performance. Handles, supports or stabilizes task objects appropriately, protecting them from being damaged, slipping, moving, or falling. Initiates, starts or begins the next task action or task step without any hesitation. Sequences, perform steps in effective or logical order with an absence of randomness in the ordering or inappropriate repetition of steps. Terminates, brings to completion single actions or single steps without inappropriate persistence or premature cessation. Navigates, moves body or wheelchair without bumping into obstacles when moving through the task environment or interacting with task objects. Stabilizes, moves through task environment and interacts with task objects without momentary propping or loss of balance. Manipulates, uses dexterous finger movements without evidence of fumbling when manipulating task objects. Aligns, interacting with task objects without evidence of persistent propping or leaning. Positions, position self in an effective distance from task objects and without evidence of an awkward arm or body positions. Reaches, effectively extends arms and when appropriate bends the trunk to effectively grasp or place task objects that are out of reach. Bends, flexes or rotates trunk as appropriate when sitting down or when bending to grasp or place task objects that are out of reach. The ability for bilateral hands to work in midline. Asymmetrical versus symmetrical bilateral hand tasks. If we have an individual utilizing a symmetrical task, are both the right hand and the left hand completing at the same speed and quality? In-hand manipulation, motor dexterity and speed, palm to fingertip translation, and different types of grasps. Are we seeing pinch versus lateral, gross grasp versus hook, etc.? Now let's apply some of these skill terms. Let's watch Ellie do a task and then look at some of the words we can use to describe it. Challenge the patient when transporting objects through targets for improved calibration with appropriate force and speed, initiation and termination with appropriate cessation, manipulation with dexterous finger movements while manipulating task objects. So for medical professionals, what are some common standardized tests and how can we describe the movement characteristics seen in these tests? Here are a few common ones: the 9-hole peg test, the box and block test, the action research arm test, and the Purdue Pegboard test. The 9-hole peg test. This is the duration of time to place 9 pegs from a container into 9 holes, and then one by one remove them again. The clinician starts the stopwatch as soon as the patient touches the first peg, and then stops the stopwatch as soon as the last peg is returned into the container. Here is Ellie demonstrating the 9-hole peg test. Movement characteristics we might see. Handles, positions, looking at the grasp type selection. Calibrates, the deviation of standard grasp force selection. Manipulates, in-hand manipulation. paces, the timing of the movements, reaches, hand transport, initiates, terminates, the starting, the stopping, and the transitions, motor dexterity and speed, sequences, motor planning and execution, the precision, the accuracy, stabilizes task objects from moving, and then palm to fingertip translation. The box and block test. This is the duration of time that an individual has to pick up a block, cross over a partition, and drop it into another compartment. It's for 60 seconds. The patient's hand must cross over that partition, and a higher score, more blocks, indicate better gross manual dexterity. Some of the movement characteristics that clinicians are going to look for and document include the hand transport as they're reaching towards the object, the grasp type selection, the type of grasp that they choose, and the amount of time, the duration to pick the correct grasp type, the grasp force selection, and the calibration of the sufficient grip force for that object, grip force scaling, and then the duration of time it takes to grasp the object, but then also after we cross over the partition, the duration for releasing that object over. The Action Research Arm Test. This is a 19-item observational measure. There's 4 subscales. An individual will do grasp, grip, pinch, and gross motor movements. The task performance is rated on a 4-point scale, ranging from 0, which is no movement, to 3, which is movement performed normally. The grasp tasks are 6 items. They lift testing material from one surface of a table to a shelf 37 centimeters above the starting point. Grip-related tasks are 4 items. The patient grips testing materials and moves them from one side of the table to the other. Pinching grasps are 6 items, using a pincer grip to move test items from one side of the table to the other. Gross movement tasks are 3 items, moving the testing arm to different resting positions, including the top of the head, behind the head, or to their mouth. Movement characteristics include hand transport, dyssynergia, dysmetria, and tension tremors. The handling, positioning, the grasp type selection, calibrates the deviation of standard grasp force selection, grip force scaling, manipulates in-hand manipulation, paces the timing of the movements, initiates and terminates the translational rotation movements. Depth perception is their convergence insufficiency, dysmetria with impaired saccades, motor dexterity and speed, the duration of grasp formation and grasp release. The Purdue Pegboard test assesses fingertip dexterity to the hands, fingers, and arms. There are 4 subtests. First, the individual places pegs in holes 30 seconds with their dominant hand. Then they place pegs into holes for 30 seconds with the non-dominant hands. Place pegs into the holes 30 seconds with both hands simultaneously at the same time. And finally, 60 seconds to assemble pins, washers, collar, and then another washer. Individuals alternate hands during the assembly. Movement characteristics clinicians look for is calibrates, uses the appropriate force, initiates, terminates, beginning the next task action without hesitation, and then bringing completion of the actions and steps. Sequences, performs the steps in an effective, logical order. Manipulates, uses dexterous finger movements without evidence of fumbling when manipulating task objects, in-hand manipulation. Motor dexterity, speed, palm to fingertip translation. The ability for bilateral hands to work in midline, and asymmetrical versus symmetrical bilateral hand tasks. So if that individual is using symmetrical tasks, are the right hand and the left hand completing at the same speed and quality? And those are some standardized tests and some skilled terminology for medical professionals. You can find links to that skilled terminology inventory linked in the description below. If you found this video educational, please press that like, subscribe to this channel, and share with others. My link to Patreon is in that description below. And then come back for our next series on the treatment for upper limb ataxia. It'll be fantastic. Check out other free educational resources and free home exercise programs here on Little Steps, Big Gains.